Hello and welcome to Procrastination Point's video Snark. If you came here because you thought that this was an audiobook, please stick around and maybe learn some reading and listening comprehension skills. I read books, discuss what went wrong and how they can possibly be fixed. I'm continuing my read-through of Crewel by Gennifer Albin. Not the first video, go check out the others, links are posted below. Chapter 8. The chapter opens with a line that I'd like to highlight. As a child, I sat wrapped on the bathroom floor and watched my mother line her eyes with a fine pen and then smooth the pink robe on her cheeks. She was the perfect Western woman, attractive, groomed, and obedient. I think it's interesting that the mother can't possibly be considered attractive without makeup, and that obedient is also considered a positive trait, especially for a woman. Once again, the misogyny is coming from inside the house here. Ad is given adequate lessons and fitted for fancy gowns. The prep for this tour, Cormac is taking her on leaves her no time for actual weaving. Since there's nothing left to occupy her mind, she thinks a lot about her family. Obviously, the image of her father in the body bag is burned inside of her head. I'm sure that by the end of this series, the government will come to regret having brutally murdered her parents. However, since she didn't actually see her mom, she's forever the last time that Ad saw her. So, how do I address these officials? Address? Yes, what do I call them? Are they considered ministers? I recall how many of his officers referred to Cormac as Minister Patton instead of Ambassador. You shouldn't address them at all. She looks at me like I've lost my mind. I don't bother to hide my annoyance. Then why am I learning this? She lets it a long, motherly sort of sigh before responding. As Ambassador Patton's escort, you will be expected to remind him of important names and information. Wait a minute. I tug out of the grip of the seamstress who was quietly sewing at my feet and turned to Nora. Are you telling me you're learning things so Cormac won't have to? Of course. Something, you make me do too much labor. Actually, that song kind of summed up this series. The women are the ones who are literally making the crops grow and then putting the finished food into the places where it needs to be. Meanwhile, the men somehow still lord over the women who literally control the fabric of reality. Inora goes on to chide Ad for being too casual around Cormac, and goes on to say that he usually only comes around once or twice a year, but he's, and I quote, enamored with Ad. Mercifully, Ad is disgusted by the thought of the dude old enough to be her father having any sort of romantic notions for her. No matter if he actually does or not, at least this is where the author is drawing the line. Just remember, he's the one who can sign the execution decree. Yeah, well, the weavers can apparently take a knife to the fabric of reality and suffer no actual consequences, apparently. So that's a useless threat. Mela then comes in and is really rude about the dress Ed is having hemmed, as if Ed herself somehow had a choice in what she was wearing. I don't exactly get the impression that Ed was allowed to actually choose, so the comment was super unnecessary. Mela rudely dismisses Inora because that's Mela's sole personality trait, apparently, being a heinous, evil woman, and then spends half a page discussing the schedule. Since none of these places she's talking about have any meaning to the readers, I considered this a waste of everybody's time. You don't deserve this. There are dozens of girls here who'd give anything to escort Cormac without acting like some entitled brat. Except that Ad asked for literally none of this. In fact, Cormac is literally forcing her into it. This is one of those things where it's like, if those other girls want this so much, then they can do it. I have yet to hear how this is somehow beneficial to Ad as a whole, because from what little info the readers have, it's only making her a huge target. She continues on and says that Eric will be accompanying the group as part of Ad's security detail, and then because this wouldn't be a proper young adult dystopia without this element, Jost is going as Cormac's valet. Ad is confused by Mela complaining about Cormac taking Jost away, mainly because the dude doesn't seem to be all that important around the compound. However, Mela continues to fill her role as the most evil person imaginable and insists that although she's complaining about Cormac taking Jost away, Jost isn't actually important. I know I'll never sleep, like the night before winter solstice when all you can think about is presents. How do you know that this is a fantasy series? Because they don't have Christmas. They have some generic off-brand of it. Ugh. This takes me way more out of the story than if it had simply said Christmas. It's so awkward and weird. Later, Inora and Valerie help to get Ad all packed up. Before she goes, Inora gives Ad something called a digifile. She says that it's to help keep her occupied during the rebounds, which I'd still like to remind the readers that we don't actually know what those are. To add to this confusion, we're now having terms flung at us like digifile. However, the way that Inora explains it, it kind of sounds like a Bluetooth phone earpiece. She says that Cormac went in for all the Spencers to have them in case of emergency. However, the Spencers have been trained in emergencies, and there's always Spencers awake around the clock. Inora reportedly tells Ads that this is so Cormac can keep a closer eye on them, with the implication that this is something way more sinister than that. And then finally, Inora drops some info about the Crewel Lori's seal, that the Crewel can capture the materials used in the weave and can manipulate the raw materials. So this is what Ad is. I mean, we knew that she was a special snowflake, but this is really hammering this fact in. Ad asks how old Lori's cell is, but Nora doesn't know. That with weaving technology and modern medicine, Lori's cell has been in service for at least 60 years. What happens when she dies? They'll find a new Crewel, and Nora's gaze is steady on mine, but so far there haven't been any real contenders. Might as well have a giant neon sign screaming about how important that this will be later. Ugh. Nora goes on to say that without a Crewel, the world around them will literally fade away. I don't know, man. Have you considered simply letting it go? I wouldn't try to save any of this sexist claptrap that forces women to be in service and murders those who dare disobey. But the thought of being so out of control of your own fate, I guess, is a little scary. So maybe I can understand both the worry Nora and Valerie have about it. But at the same time, there's apparently nothing stopping Mela from taking another knife to the tapestry and killing them that way, so... On the train the next morning, Cormac and Ad are joined by Eric and Joss, for literally no other reason than to hammer in the fact that these two are the love interests, because security is one thing, but why is the valet riding with the master? That's not how any of this works. Ad asks if Eric and Joss know one another, which seems kind of silly considering that they're both men in this female-only compound, but Eric says he ordered Joss to go take care of Ad when he threw her into the dungeon. Joss is the head valet. So, quick question. Why is there a valet in a women's-only compound? Which man is Joss taking care of? Is it Eric? Why are there so many valets in the compound that require a head valet in the first place? It would be one thing if Joss had valet training, but it seems more like that's his sole job. I kind of get the impression that the author doesn't actually know what a valet is, like she read it once in a book and never bothered to actually look into it. Eric asks if she's nervous about rebounding. When she says yes, there's this uncomfortable bit where Ad reminds the reader that Eric literally drugged her. However, Eric doesn't seem to care about that, which is why Joss is obviously the favored romantic interest. When the stewardess takes Ad into the rebounding room, she asks why Ad seems nervous for her second rebounding. Ad doesn't have the heart to tell her that she was literally chained up and drugged for her first time. We get a little bit more info this time about rebounding, but not much. I think that it's people reworking the weave around them to transport them across long distances, but I seriously have no idea. When she comes out on the other end, she meets up first with Joss, then Eric. Eric tells them that something came up and Cormac had to leave to go deal with it, which is fine and understandable. But the problem is that they're literally shoving Ad into the proverbial deep end by making her face the first press conference alone. What a terrible thing to do. Joss ambles up beside me, and I realize the two are now flanking me like I've seen Eric and Mela's guards do with Mela. Why did they not send along another guard? Why is Joss, whom I'd like to remind you is a valet, being forced into a guard duty? Whoops, I'm using that silly logic again. There can't be another man there because he'd take away from the fact that Joss is supposed to be a love interest. They go into the station where there's a bunch of reporters. Eric tells them that they only have 15 minutes. They start to ask her questions. What they ask isn't important, but I would like to highlight this. They ask about the food, my work, the other eligibles, and I recite my answers as naturally as possible, like a good machine. Then one person steps forward and asks what happened to her parents. The plot thickens. Chapter 9. Eric is quick to usher Ad away. As they go, she thinks about Joss's constant warnings and laughs the entire thing off. The narration quickly brushes over Ad doing a photo show, which is with about as much energy as it took to explain Ad's feelings about the question of her parents. That is to say, literally no time at all. Then she goes on a second rebound. This time, Cormac is there when she gets out. He drags her into a bar and demands that Joss make him a drink. Eric has to remind Cormac that they're on a schedule, but Cormac acts like he'd rather get drunk. Then he gets angry when Ad tells him not to show up at the next interview like that. I'd like to remind people that Cormac is kind of their big boss, and holy cow, can you imagine what would happen if some big hotshot CEO showed up drunk to an interview? They go to their next interview, although this is completely glossed over. Then the photo show, which has a bit more detail, but still not a lot. I have to wonder, we're in chapter 9 of 23. If the author is this bored with her own work at this point in the novel, I have to worry how bad that the rest of the series is going to get. After that, they go to the hotel where Ad is supposed to have some downtime, but also be allowed to eat. However, Valerie and her crew come in and start working on Ad before she can actually eat, because, yeah, forcing a girl to go all day without eating seems super healthy. I croak out against Valerie's hand, which is firmly holding my jaw as she plucks my eyebrows. So they've been prepping Ad to go on this trip for a few weeks now, but for some unholy reason they had yet to pluck her eyebrows. I get plucking a stray hair or two, but it sounds like they've been working on Ad for hours and hours. At this point, this is more performative than anything, and this seriously pisses me off more than your standard makeover montage. Joss comes into the room and literally helps to feed her when it becomes obvious as to why she can't do it herself. So I guess that explains it. Why have agency when you can have a man hand feed you? I'm all for romantic gestures, but this is completely and utterly taking away Ad's freedom. It's icky. Now full, Ad falls asleep for a moment, which forces Valerie to wake her up when it's finally time to get dressed. As they continue on, the other women express confusion over Ad having chosen Joss, especially when she could have Eric or Cormac, but that one makes me gag. And I know that I've been talking about both men like they are love interests, but I've also read way too many young adult series and I know how these things work. But for these grown adults to talk about Ad's relationship with Joss like that, it's also really icky. The women told her that Cormac goes through a woman quickly. Ew, ew, ew. But they also warned that Eric is Mayla's. Also gross. They don't believe Ad when she insists that she isn't interested in any of them like that. Well, you looking beautiful for one thing, he says, and I have to hold myself back from laughing. Does that stuff work with the other girls? I ask, barely containing my amusement. Yeah, he says, grinning widely. How are you so immune to my charms? Years of segregation, I say, letting myself smile a little. That usually works in my favor, he admits in a whisper. Eric openly admitted that he preys on girls who are too naive to know any better. Throw him away because he is trash. Cormac ushers Ad outside past more reporters who shout out questions as they pass. However, when they get to their end destination, Ad can't help but note that the crowd there seems like they've been forced to come, like they'd rather be doing literally anything else. It's at this point that Ad finally asks what they'll be doing. He says that it's a ribbon cutting ceremony for a new school, and Ad realizes that this is to replace the school Mela destroyed. Ad looks out over the crowd of people who are pointedly asking what Cormac had ordered done to them. They act like they don't care at all, which indicates that their brains had been messed with in order to make them forget about the atrocity committed. Somebody hands Ad the ceremonial scissors, and she thinks for a second that she could at least do a bit of damage to Cormac with them. Then a really old-looking woman shows up. Ed has never seen anybody who looks so physically old before since they have the technology to stop the physical signs of aging. This is Lori Sell, the Crueler. And she makes obvious her disdain for Cormac, mainly the fact that he's dragging a girl young enough to be his daughter around. Yes, sis, call him out. If women can't even protect girls, then there's no hope left at all. However, she is interested in Ad, and Ad is obviously interested in her. When Cormac turns around to talk to somebody else, Lori still asks if she's enjoying herself, and seems pleased when Ad answers in the negative. Lori still pointedly tells Ad that this is how things work. They try to woo the girls with shiny trinkets and pretty dresses. When Ad says that she is interested in physical things, Lori still says that they'll start to strike at the heart. Ad insists that there's only one person left, and that's her sister, but Lori still seems to be of the opinion that they'll dig up people, which is laughable considering that they've already flat out murdered Ad's parents, or at least that's what she thinks. There was never any actual confirmation that Ad's mother had been killed, only Cormac insisting that it's what happened. So there's little doubt in my mind that they aren't keeping Mummy Dearest in a dungeon somewhere only for her to be trot out when Ad starts to rebel. Why do you care? I asked, not bothering to hide my curiosity. She's nothing like I expected. Because I once sat where you were with a handsome, smarmy guild official, and no one told me, she says, and the lines on her face reappear. For sure, this woman was sexually abused, but brainwashed into thinking that it was true love and romantic. Ad then cuts the ribbon. As she passes off this comically oversized scissors, she tells Cormac, "You've made your point." He implies that this is only the beginning. She then looks out at the crowd and spots her sister. She races through the crowd to get to her and then becomes belligerent when the quote-unquote mother insists that the girl's name is Rhea. I seriously don't know what she expected. I get that this is upsetting to her. It would be upsetting to anybody, but come on, girl, use your freaking brain. Laura So literally warned you that they do stuff like this in order to get under your skin. Joss drags her back to the car, which she gets into alone. Eric slides in after her and tells her that he's being made to go somewhere by himself, but he warns her to knee Cormac in the crotch should he try anything, which, damn, he's not even pretending like he doesn't know Cormac hasn't hurt girls in the past. Eric gives her a file that can be used to connect to him on his digifile before he leaves. Then Cormac comes in and wants to know what Eric wanted. Ad feels sick to her stomach when the thought that she'd fallen for Cormac's trap with Amy, hook, line, and sinker. He randomly takes her to this cliff and says, "All of this is yours for the taking." I honestly have no idea what this is supposed to mean. Later, Ad dozes off in the car but awakens to the sound of Cormac on the phone. She pretends to be asleep as she listens to his side of the conversation. He's basically saying some stuff about the reporter from earlier who asked the questions about Ad's parents, that it's something that needs to be taken care of before it spreads any further. Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. New videos are up every Monday, but stick around because I sometimes drop random videos on other days too. Just as a reminder, even if you can't financially support me, there are other ways to help me out. The first is watching this video as well as all my other videos. It's also important to like and subscribe. Finally, you can share this video with all of your friends so that they can help as well. If you're already caught up with all of my videos, you can go to Tumblr for my main book Snarks, always free and updated every morning. Newly added to Patreon is to become a member without paying. You'll get access to the same things on Tumblr, but on Patreon. Supporters can have access to so many more books now starting at $1 a month. Also, Note is a 1-week free Patreon trial, so be sure to check that out. Special thanks to Dawn and Phoebe for supporting me on Patreon already. If you want to hear your name in my video next week, either support me on Patreon or make a one-time donation. Do you like my Snark so much that you want me to snark your writing? I do that too. For just $6 per chapter, I will tell you how awful that your writing is, but not to worry if you feel like you couldn't take the criticism. I also offer regular book editing as well, just $10 per chapter. You can contact me on any of my social media platforms if you have further questions. If you want to read some of the things that I've written, you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have a slew of spicy short stories and 2 full-length novels. I also frequently run flash sales on my stories, and if you don't follow me on any social media, you might want to do so just so you can know when I might be offering things for free. Links for everything will be posted below. See you next week, guys. Fucking assholes are leaf blowing right next door. There's no leaves there. We don't have trees.